Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. It's episode 208, and we are entering the bye week with it's fantastic, an Arizona Cardinals victory. They pull out. It was a boring snooze fest for three quarters, but great fourth quarter. The Cardinals come back, win the game 18-15. We get the first Josh Rosen experience in terms of getting a win. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, part of the USA Today NFL Wire, covering the Arizona Cardinals, of course, and my co-host is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation. Seth, everything seems to be right-ish. It at least is not. It's not in a downward spiral, and it comes at a perfect time.
Yeah, it does. It gives them, a week to continue to build on what was a strong effort, because strong effort defensively and strong offensive effort in the fourth quarter. And when we say build on, we mean that fourth quarter effort, because they go up against the best offense in the NFL coming out of their bye. So that's the look ahead. So looking back at this game, I mean, we can skip three quarters of it because there was nothing to really talk about, like you said.
It was a perfect game for a Sunday afternoon. If you like to take a nap on a Sunday afternoon, you turn on the game, you watch it, you fall asleep, you wake up, nothing's really happened. Fall asleep, wake up, it's the fourth quarter, and it's still nothing's happened. And then you get really exciting football. It's kind of the joke that was going on in the press box between me and Eric Sorensen from Sports 360 AZ. But it was a good ending. But that's not all we're going to talk about in this show. There's lots to talk about as the trade deadline has now passed. We're going to talk about our reaction to the trade deadline, or as we're going to learn, is obviously it's the lack of trades for the Cardinals. But there were trades around the league. We're going to take a look at the Byron Leftwich offense and what we find hopeful, what concerns are, and talk a little bit about the trends that were different, which a couple of really interesting interesting tidbits that we'll find out if they become trends in the weeks to come. We will talk about the defense as against the 49ers. The Cardinals went back to a true base 4-3 defense. That meant Deon Buchanan. And then we'll talk more about the win, the reactions, and what it means moving forward. So that's what we're going to talk about on the show. So let's talk about first trade deadline reaction. The Cardinals were in a lot of rumors and a lot of speculation. And then you had, I could count. So thanks to Jason LaConfora, first they were open and perhaps even shopping Deon Buchanan and Hassan Reddick. Patrick Peterson was then, they were open to it. And then we find out that Patrick Peterson, in fact, requested a trade. And then there was, trades that we would like to see happen. That was an article that came up somewhere. And of course, there was the talk, trade Larry Fitzgerald to a winner because it's the end of his career and things like that. And ultimately, the Cardinals did nothing. Was that what they should have done?
It's one of those things where you look at it. I was never really on board with trading Patrick Peterson because, as we talked about last week, trading a cornerback, trading a defensive end, a left tackle if you have one, or obviously a quarterback is just asinine. Unless we talked about that package that ESPN floated where you get Trey Waynes and a first and a third. And that was the only one that made any sense to me because you got a immediate replacement for Peterson. And then you got a first round pick on top of it. But it didn't make sense to me. And then the whole Fitzgerald thing is one of those things. I think if he goes to management and says hey, this isn't what we had discussed, can you guys, quietly see if you can find something that works for me to one of these, 4 teams? And he gives them a list. I don't think, obviously as lifetime Cardinals fans, as you and I are, we are upset because they put they put Larry Fitzgerald in that position to have to ask that. But in the same sentence, it's not like one, it's not like you're going to get anywhere with Larry Fitzgerald this year. And two, if he decides, hey, this is my last year, I'm not coming back. So I want to be playing as long as I can in the 2018 season. I think he's earned the right to do that if he goes about it the right way. Obviously, he didn't because, there was no leaks, there was no nothing. Like it wasn't what he wanted to do. So he was fine with staying an Arizona Cardinal. The reality was like there's not like they're going to get anything for him. I mean, what were they going to get a fifth round pick that went to
the speculation, like the trade, it was a third or a fourth round pick, and you're like, ew.
Yeah. So, but I mean, so again, if he says, "Hey, do it," then I think out of courtesy to everything he's done for the franchise, you have to try. But there's no reason to shop him other than unless he's saying, "Hey, shop me," because again, it's not like they have a lot of options to replace him, and so you take your leading receiver in terms of receptions and you get rid of him, and then you create a bigger hole than what you already had. Reddick and Buchanan are different, and they're different in and of themselves. Obviously, Buchanan because it was kind of like the HaHa Clinton Dix, the Ty Montgomery, the whoever, all these other guys that just got traded were that you're like, oh, aren't those guys good? Why are they getting traded? And then it was like, oh, it's for a fourth round pick. And then it was like, oh, it's because they weren't going to be re-signed by their current team. So if Deion Buchanan went, I mean, that was the reason, right? Like it was the Deion Buchanan experiment is over in Arizona. Steve Wilkes, they're obviously going to make plans that he's back in 2019, so they're not going to necessarily make him fit a square peg into a round hole and whatnot. So from that perspective, it all kind of it all would have made sense if that was something they decided to do. Obviously, they didn't. Reddick was a different thing. Reddick is one of those where how do you give up on a first round pick in year two unless you get a pretty good return on investment? And I'm not saying you have to get the 13th pick, but I would assume you'd want a player and then like a day two pick. And again, that's a really dangerous thing to cut bait this early on an athlete. It's not like he's Buchanan where he's had a good season in 5 seasons, and so you kind of know where he's at. It's a guy that has now played 4 different positions in the NFL in 22 games. So like you're giving up on a guy without actually knowing what he can do. So
right, and he's making plays and showing improvements. I think it's different than Buchanan, and ultimately Buchanan probably was still more valuable than a throwaway day 2, day 3 pick on an offensive lineman that's going to get cut in a year. That type of thing. But yeah, Buchanan really would have been the only one that makes sense. And then obviously, if you look at the context of the team, you have a 2-6 team that's struggling on offense and defense. It's not like outside of Patrick Peterson, maybe, and Chandler Jones and some of those their best players that would be hard to deal and would be costly to deal for. On bad teams, you typically don't trade for players who aren't doing well on bad teams because they're part of the problem. So yeah, trade JJ Nelson. I'd love to trade JJ Nelson. What in the world are you going to get for JJ Nelson?
A bag of slightly used footballs.
Like a conditional 2025 7th round pick.
Right. And conditional would be, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing is Ty Montgomery is a guy that outside of last week had been a contributor to a successful NFL team. JJ Nelson has been
a disappointment on a bad team.
right, exactly. So like, yeah, like what are yeah, exactly. So it is what it is. Like
you want Brandon Williams? Definitely.
right. So and so that's the thing is like the Cardinals have like the biggest trade blocks or trade chips the Cardinals had were Patrick Peterson and Chandler Jones. But those are two positions you just don't trade unless they're guys that are on the wrong side of their contract. Like and Peterson and Jones are still on the right side of their contract. Now,
right. And they're both on, like, you look at today's market, great contracts for their positions.
And again, if Patrick Peterson wants out, I mean, it's one of those situations where you listen to offers, and if something blows your socks off, you do it because obviously he's unhappy. But at the end of the day, it's still your decision to make.
Yeah. And some of the moves around the league were kind of fun, honestly. The trade deadline today, recording on a Tuesday as we normally do, the trade deadline felt more almost like NBA like or baseball like, where there were sort of some big moves. I mean, Demaryius Thomas is leaving the Broncos to go to the Texans, who play the Broncos this weekend. How fun is that?
Yeah, that was an interesting one. You had obviously you had quite a bit of movement with like interesting like competitive teams, right? Golden Tate.
Yeah.
Golden Tate leaves a 3-3 or 3-4 Lions team. Like the Lions are fighting for a playoff spot. Obviously, we talked about the Packers trading both Clinton Dix and Ty Montgomery, and it's like, holy crap! Like, why are those guys being traded? Those are good players, right? But you dig a little deeper. They haven't worked out this year, obviously, and the Packers are not what they expected to be. But when you look at it from the specs of like the Packers are a contending team because they have Aaron Rodgers, but they're not really a contending team, if that makes sense. Like Aaron Rodgers can carry them to a championship, but in the same breath, they're not a championship worthy team. And so at that point, you find ways to reload in the next season with your championship level quarterback, knowing that moving Clinton Dix isn't going to drastically change the outcome of the Packers season. Like, obviously moving Ty Montgomery isn't going to change anything in the Packers season. So when you look at it from that perspective, they're big names, but they're not guys that are going to make a difference. Now, Demaryius Thomas going to Houston, that's a big move because Will Fuller just tore his ACL, and now the Texans kind of have a nice replacement. Golden Tate going to Philadelphia makes no sense whatsoever because he plays the slot, and that's where like Nelson Aguilar and those guys play. Like everybody expected the Eagles to get a running back, and they went and got another wide receiver. But Golden Tate might be the best receiver on the team now, right. So it's not necessarily a bad trade. It's like it's never bad to get good players, but sometimes you see stuff and you're like, what the heck? So
the one move that I think is a very underrated move, especially because it affects the Cardinals, is the Rams, who really have, it seems, nobody as their edge
outside pass rush,
and they just got a very talented Dante Fowler. Inconsistent, not super productive, certainly a disappointment in Jacksonville. But now you're going to put him in a Wade Phillips system, and guess what? He's probably going to be good because they've got the interior. Because now he's going to be on the outside of Michael Brockers, Ndamukong Suh, and Aaron Donald. So you automatically put some athleticism out there, and he's more talented than anything they already have. And so you just made that Rams team good. I mean, they're already. I mean, the Rams are seemingly, they're just buzzsawing through everyone right now, and they're not 100% healthy. and they just added talent on defense too. So I think that's a really underrated move. I don't know what that does for Jacksonville, but they're kind of a mess this year too, which is disappointing because I love me some Blake Bortles, as you do too.
And you know, it's one of those you'd like to see Calais in on a solid note, and it's not going to happen. It looks like, but you know, it's one of those seasons where it sucks to suck this year because it's definitely like there's definitely the great team right now in the Rams, and then like you look at the AFC and I would guess it's a coin flip between the Chiefs and the Patriots because I mean my goodness that game a couple weeks ago was so good. And then you think that the Saints can maybe compete with the Rams, like they have a really good offense and their defense has improved, but like it'd be nice to even be in the mix because God forbid, you never hope for this, but like one injury, like Jared Goff goes down, all of a sudden, like you feel like that Rams team's really beatable, Drew Brees or Pat Mahomes or Tom Brady. And so it's not like last year where it was just a wide open, or just a bunch of really good teams. This year it's like it seems like there's 4 great teams and then a bunch of teams that are interchangeable at this point, depending on the week.
Right, and that's what makes this trade deadline really interesting. It would have been nice to have gotten some picks, but again, it's not like the Cardinals had anyone that you would want to trade.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the other thing. They don't.
They either are just getting garbage picks and just dumping people, or I mean, really, you don't think that the Sam Bradford wouldn't have been a better option in Buffalo?
Oh, I know, right? Poor Buffalo, though.
Oh my gosh, and yes, and Derek Anderson starts on Monday Night Football and gets a concussion, and now they're going back to Nathan Peterman. Dude, Cardinals should have made a move there and traded Sam Bradford or even Mike
Glennon, right? Yeah, like just give them something.
Let's be honest. No, that would have been a bad move because Mike Glennon is the next Drew Stanton. So let's keep him around. He's supposed to be the Josh Rosen whisperer, and ideally when there's some magic comeback that he can be the super dancer with the long neck, like Drew Stanton on the sideline. Exactly. Anyway, that coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We're going to talk about the offensive side of the ball. We're going to talk about the Byron Leftwich offense and the Cardinals, and what it means, what happened, what was different than Mike McCoy, and that's coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast. I'd like to remind you all of our friends over at Harry's.com, continuing to talk about them just because for those of us who shave on a regular basis, which is pretty much most of us, what we shave with matters, whether you use an electric blade, or if you pay a lot of money for the brand names, or you use the disposable blades. Let me tell you that Harry's is a fantastic option. I made the switch myself, and I use the electric blade because I used electric razor for a long time, and since going back to the blade, I don't know why I did it, but I know why I did it, because the expensive blades, they're really expensive, and the disposable blades are pretty much garbage, in my opinion. So going to Harry's gave me the balance of value and quality. They've got quality blades. It's a wonderful, close, smooth shave, and the shave gel they have is absolutely fantastic. Smells great, feels great. It's high quality razors. They've got a factory that's been making the highest quality blades for the last 95 years, and the Harry's blades are roughly half the cost of the name brand. They're just $2 per blade compared to $4 or more. And so, as always, we've got this trial offer for you guys, for our listeners. Get a $13 trial value that comes with everything you need. It comes with the handle, comes with a 5-blade razor, comes with the shave gel, comes with the travel blade cover. And you can get that trial set, redeem that at harrys.com/cred. So make sure to go to harrys.com/cred to redeem your offer, test out those blades, and let them know that I sent you to support the show. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. And we now circle back to the actual game itself. And other than how things ended, it comes up with a win. We want to focus specifically on offense because this was the debut of offensive coordinator Byron Leftwich since he was promoted from quarterbacks coach after the firing of Mike McCoy. So McCoy's out. Leftwich is in. He's still got the same personnel, and truthfully, he's got to run with the same playbook, at least the first week. What did you see from that offense?
I saw, like you said, a lot of the same. I mean, obviously, there wasn't an integrated offense yet, but you saw a lot of similar things. I thought you saw a little more zone running schemes, which you saw help David Johnson be able to, kind of bounce and move a little bit, find the gaps instead of being that kind of bludgeoner that we've talked about that he's not. I saw some bad concepts along the offensive line still, which is unfortunate. But again, I think as much as we want to rip on Mike McCoy, there was a lot that wasn't on him, and the offensive line struggles are clearly not on Mike McCoy. But when you look at the fourth quarter, and you look at what the Cardinals did in the fourth quarter, I think you saw a team that's got talent, and you see a team that, if used correctly, can be a competent NFL football team. And I'm not saying that they're a good NFL football team. Like, there's a difference between good teams and what the Cardinals are. But they can be competent. And competent in the NFL just means watchable on Sundays. And right now, for 3 quarters, the Cardinals were not watchable. I mean, you kind of joked about it, like, take a nap, do anything else, go for a walk, do some chores, clean up your honeydew list, like whatever it is, do any of it. Don't watch Cardinals play football because it's been bad. And so when you do it from that, to then the fourth quarter where it's a little exciting, you go a little up tempo, you remember that you have a first ballot Hall of Famer on your team and he can still play at a high level. Things look different. And I think that's what we saw. I will say this, the 2 biggest changes I saw before the fourth quarter were Leftwich's willingness to use more zone runs, and then obviously the screen game.
Yes, very interesting. Now, if you just want to go at a surface level, you really couldn't have asked for, at least production, a more perfect debut for Leftwich based on what Cardinals fans have been craving, what the coaching staff, what Steve Wilkes has been asking. Because if you just look at the surface, what you saw was they had their highest offensive output. Now, it's the first time they went over 300 yards this year.
Oh, my gosh. That's so sad.
It's week 8. David Johnson hit the century mark in scrimmage yards. It was exactly 100 yards. So it wasn't great, but it was fine. So 100 yards from scrimmage. Larry Fitzgerald got over 100 yards receiving. He had the season high in catches, a season high in receiving yards. He scored a touchdown. You had, what was it? Their 3 longest drives of the season. What, they have 3 or 4? I think it was 4 drives. I think it was, I can't remember. I should have pulled that up. But they had one drive. Summary. Crap. And sorry, we'll edit this part out. We'll edit this so I can actually find, where was that? Where's the ball drive? So they ended up with 1, 2, 3. They had 1, 2, 3 drives of at least 60 yards. And Other things, they had even amount of snaps. They had the same amount of offensive snaps as defensive snaps, and so you really kind of got, and they won. And so on the surface, ultimately, you got exactly what you're looking for. Now, if you dig a little deeper, obviously the running game wasn't ideal. They got 88 yards on the ground. David Johnson still run 16 for 59. It's nothing to write home about. It's still less than 4 yards a carry. But the numbers that stood out were shared by Pro Football Focus, and that is they'd had 23 screenplays in the first 7 weeks. So about 3 1/3 they were averaging per game. They had 10 screenplays against the 49ers. The other one that was interesting is that 50%, so it isn't necessarily that they were targeting down the field more, so they were throwing short and they were throwing a little longer. One of the more frustrating things, especially early in the season, was the fact when you see, especially like on third down, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, and they throw the ball 3 yards short of the sticks. Cardinals on 50% of their throws targeted beyond the stick. So they were throwing for first downs, more, which was 12% higher, 11.5% higher than it was before. And so there's some really interesting metrics there that I don't know if we can say that's a trend. We can't say it's a trend yet. 1's a point, 2's a trend, 3's a pattern, something they say on the radio. But at least we get something to look forward to. So we're seeing more zone reading. We see more zone running. We see screenplays. We see more attacking the first down. So trying to get actively those first down with the throw rather than with yards after the catch. And you also see David Johnson used more in space. Now, he was not lined out at wide receiver as much as he was in 2016, and we still did not see really anything with him and Chase Edmonds. That happened on one play. But you did see heavy David Johnson usage in the game. He left out of the game for a concussion for evaluation of concussion. I can't talk today. And he still played 53% of the snaps, 53 of the 66 snaps he was in the game. And that was even missing basically an entire drive.
Yeah, and so one of the things that we talked about was how were they going to use David Johnson, and so I dug up the stats, and they'll be out. So before this is out, they'll be out on Revenge of the Birds of like the projected stats for the year for a lot of these guys. But so it's crazy to look at David Johnson, right? Because coming into this game, he was averaging less than 3 catches a game. And so after this game, it's still not great. It's not like we're talking about he's David Johnson again. But he's averaging, now a little more. He's only on pace for 48 catches on the season. That's just insane to think about, right? But so he had 41 yards receiving, and that ties for his most yards receiving on the season. I don't think they targeted him enough, but I do think that they were more thoughtful with their targets, if that makes sense.
Right, and he still was not used vertically at all because his catches for his targets were all right around the line of their screens and right around the line of scrimmage.
But when you're looking at his usage in games, and so like you go for the whole season, the first game, 14 touches, second game, 14 touches, third game, 16 touches. The Seattle game, he had 25 touches, so that's more what we expected. 20 touches, 17 touches, and then he had 20 touches again. So again, like, it's not optimal usage still, like it's not there, but we're talking about, like, we're seeing a trend in the right direction. So, to give some credit to McCoy now that he's passed, he started to at least look competent and like at least getting the right amount of touches to David Johnson. It's not like he was doing it well still, but at least he was getting the proper amount of touches going in that direction.
Yeah. I think when we talk about Mike McCoy, the passing concepts weren't bad. The execution was bad. The running concepts this week, if you go to the next gen stats from on NFL.com, you can see that David Johnson's carries were much more balanced. There was more of a variety than there has been. They still did a lot of inside runs. That is still, they did a lot of run up the middle, but there was the option because of the blocking scheme. There was the option for him to bounce it out, and he did that. He did that a few times, so it looked much better. Interesting again to see what happens moving forward. Does that spread out a little bit more? And they had an interesting thing. A couple things that we note is they did some window dressing, as they called it, for some formation. TJ Logan, active only for the second time this year, was on the field for a play, and he goes in motion. And so that in the playbook there's the option for him to get that jet sweep, or they can have a couple of plays that build off of that. You saw J.J. Nelson getting more use, not any more production. He was used on the jet sweep once. He basically dropped a beautiful throw by Josh Rosen, which would have been a touchdown. And he drew he's good for drawing pass interference plays down the field.
The crazy thing about that play is if he keeps running, he probably catches the ball. But he
goes back to it and tries to leap up and get it.
And I hate saying stuff like this, but he's such a bad receiver. Like, just in terms of what he's receiving technique, that he doesn't understand those type of things. And so, yeah, it was like, man, just keep running and you can't. Oh, well, it is what it is.
Maybe, but hey, at least it turned into a positive. I liked what I saw, but for 3 quarters, you were wondering, maybe Mike McCoy wasn't the problem.
And I still think that's a fair thing to say. We still don't know if Mike McCoy is the problem. However, we can say without a shadow of a doubt that in terms of ingenuity, we'll start with that word, that Byron Leftwich is going to be better. We know that we're going to see a more diverse game plan, and we're going to see concepts that fit the talent more. And so all of those things kind of override the idea of was Mike McCoy the problem?
Right. And I'm really excited to see what there is moving forward. Now, I don't want to make this sound better or worse than what is, but also it is important to note when the Cardinals started playing better offensively in the fourth quarter, because they put up 186 yards offensively in the fourth quarter, and they finished with 321.
You're going to be buzzkill now?
Just so this is, and I probably should have brought this up later on in the show, but before we get super high and think, that they're going to be able to buzz the ball down the field the same way that the Chiefs and Rams do, just understand the 49ers, which are a bad team to begin with and already had injuries in the secondary, lost 2 more players from their secondary in the fourth quarter. So they lost Jaquiski Tart, they lost Anton Exum, and so they were down to Tyvis Powell. And in talking to Chris Biederman, formerly of Niners Wire, now works for the Sacramento Bee, I was talking to him after the game, though. Tyvis Powell gave up both those touchdowns, and he is basically not good, and you really don't want him on the field. But when you're left with it, this is kind of the equivalent of being left with Jamar Taylor and Brandon Williams as your cornerbacks. And so Jamar is kind of what they have in San Francisco right now. It's the equivalent of, hey, you've got Patrick Peterson, Brandon Williams, and Rudy Ford playing in the secondary.
Yeah, and so it's not optimal, but that is something that we haven't seen, and I'll say that as well, that we haven't seen from this team this year, is that they've taken advantage of bad teams. Right. And so, I mean, because that's the thing is, like, think about what Jess said earlier. This was the first game where they had 300 or more yards in total offense. So you can point to that San Francisco game all you want, the first one where they scored 28 points, but 21 of those points were on the defense. I mean, in a good way. Like, you had obviously the fumble return for a touchdown, but then you had 2 turnovers caused that gave the offense short fields. And so you didn't have to ask very much of that offense to get in and score. And so when you look at it from like all of those angles, like Jess said, it was against a bad team, but it was something we haven't seen even against bad teams this year.
And with that, let's wrap up the talk of the offense. When we come back on the Best Hour Cardinals talk on the web, the Rise Up C Red podcast, we'll talk about the defensive side of the ball and a return to the 4-3 defense. Dayon Buchanan stopping the running game, and will we say it more? That's coming up next on Rise Up C Red. We're back on the Rise Up C Red podcast. We're going to talk about the defensive side of the ball, and the biggest takeaway, I think, that it was a big talking point against the 49ers is that they opened and stayed in a base defense pretty much the whole game. Now, when the 49ers went with their base offensive packages, the Cardinals went with 3 linebackers. That meant playing time for Dayon Buchanan, who didn't have a bad game. Now, Steve Wilks, what he said the reason was this. It was because they played nickel against the 49ers before. They wanted to kind of change things up, knowing basically to play a trick on them because San Francisco would be practicing against nickel. They wanted to perhaps match up a little bit better to the 21 personnel that San Francisco runs, because they run a lot with a running back and a fullback, which is even though the fullback is still in the league, most teams that have them don't use them very much. Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers do a lot of things out of 21 personnel, more probably than anyone else in the league. Do you buy that that's why they did it? Buchanan comes back, and he said, that's what you're going to try and pigeonhole me to say, is that we switch back to the 4-3. We switch back to 3 linebackers and it worked. And that's, why didn't we do it sooner? What's your take on that?
I don't think there was I think the first thing is it was out of necessity because they don't have another safety. I mean, they just signed Eddie Pleasant. Was that the guy's name?
Mm-hmm.
Some that's not a real name, but yeah, something like that. And because Trey Boston's injured, and for how long, who knows? Maybe he's back, next week. And so when you look at that, it just became a battle of like, hey, let's be completely honest with each other at this juncture, and that Rudy Ford and Eddie Pleasant are not as good of football players as Dayon Buchanan. So let's just play Dayon this week and kind of go with it. I can respect that. Like, as a coach, if you're making those decisions, if you're making those calls, like you have to acknowledge how to get the best players on the field. Now, I'm never going to agree with Wilks in what he wants to do because his system is predicated on having super talented linebackers, and he doesn't have super talented natural linebackers. And so when you look at it from that perspective, it's on Wilks to adjust his defense. I'm with him 100%. Like, even in youth football, you can have and create fantastic schemes and plays, but if you don't have the talent to use it, it it's useless. And so at some point you have to get your mind around the fact that your scheme is not talent transcendent, but it is in fact talent dependent. And I like Deion Buchanan. I like Hassan Reddick. I like Josh Bynes. But let's not kid ourselves that the drop off from Luke Kuechly and Thomas Davis to those guys is quite the drop off. It's basically the drop off from Carson Palmer to Blaine Gabbert. I mean, that's the steepness of that drop off when you're talking about Steve Wilks' defensive scheme.
Again, and for me, here's the thing. I will believe. I don't like to just plain disbelieve something that a coach says. So if Trey Boston is healthy, maybe they do more of this traditional base 4-3 and Buchanan plays. However, the reality is that just 1 week ago against the Denver Broncos, they had the chance to put Buchanan out there, and they didn't, and instead went with the regular safety rotation. Basically, instead of moving multiple people around, they just plugged in Rudy Ford in for Trey Boston. And how did that go? Not well. And Wilks lost all faith in Rudy Ford, as evidenced on Sunday when they played. And even when they went nickel, it was not Rudy Ford that came in, but rather Bené Benwickery moving from corner to safety, and Jamar Taylor coming in at cornerback. So it was, I think, every bit schematically and in terms of game planning, even though there might have been an element to that, I'm not going to say that that's a lie.
Right. He's not, I wouldn't say he's lying. I would say that he was forced to change what he wanted to do
right
based on his available personnel.
Trey Boston's healthy, we probably don't have this conversation because Trey Boston plays, and I understand the notion why. I understand that because, and this is what I was talking over, and I'm going to write about it, so you'll probably see it, is that the supposed scheme or this personnel package problem that the Cardinals have, or the fans believe they have, or the media believe they have, this conversation never takes place at all. In fact, this question never happens if Deion Buchanan plays well in week 1, because they went traditional. They went with 4-3. They went with all three of the linebackers on the field in week 1. And guess what? Buchanan was bad. So if Buchanan plays well at the beginning of the season, I don't think anything changes. And, I think, they might go in some nickels. In fact, I have no problem with them doing what they're doing, because I'm going to go back to the core of what Steve Wilks always says. Steve Wilks says the reason why he and they scheme, they say they use nickel in base, and they believe they have the personnel to do it, is, and on offense, when you're in base and you get a base defense, what you're always trying to do is to create mismatches, especially like they do with David Johnson. When you go nickel, you eliminate that. Now let's go back to, what Deion Buchanan is initially. The truth is, that's what the Cardinals have always been doing, because Deion Buchanan was supposed to be that hybrid player, that defensive back who can play linebacker. So if Deion Buchanan is playing well to begin with, technically, just like the Cardinals have been doing for the last 6 years, is playing a base nickel. We just stopped thinking about Buchanan as a defensive back because I think literally we've never seen him do it. I don't know if he's ever been lined up as a safety technically since he started career. That might be a little bit hyperbole, but it's been almost none. And so whether it's Buchanan in there or Budda Baker in there or Antoine Bethea, Buchanan's a little bit bigger. But I mean, ultimately, that's what they were always doing. We never have the conversation at all. If Buchanan is good, And at that point, we would be looking at a rotation of some Buchanan playing and some Boston playing, because that's how it's going to go. Because Antoine Bethea plays every snap, Buda Baker plays every snap, and what we saw on Sunday, David Buchanan played 39 of 66, so they played a lot of base, but they played a lot of base because the 49ers do a lot of 21 personnel, and then they went nickel, so Buchanan came off the field, and they brought in Jamar Taylor, slid Benet Wickery, and it worked out. It worked out pretty well defensively. Now, the disappointment is the fact that what was that supposed to be initially at the beginning of the year is the fact that it was always supposed to be, even a nickel, Buchanan and Reddick on the field because of their elite athleticism.
Yeah, and so now you're to the point where, that's what I said at the beginning of the show. Like if they cut bait with Dayon Buchanan, if they trade Dayon Buchanan, it makes sense because he doesn't have a place in Steve Wilks' defense. And it's not that he's not a good player. Again, it's just Steve Wilks' concepts and schemes he doesn't fit right now, or probably ever. And so when you look at it from that perspective, that's kind of what Jess is saying is like if Dayon Buchanan was a good fit, Dayon Buchanan would be playing. I don't think it would be that. And so that's, that goes back to what I was talking about with the scheme. Like, I know this is what he does and he's been successful with it. But to me, it just becomes this idea of like your scheme can't dictate who you are. Your personnel kind of dictates who you are, and you just have to be willing to adapt, even if it's in the short intermediary for a season, and then say, hey, Steve, get me this linebacker, and then start to change it. But when you're trying to force a square peg into a round hole, you're getting the results that you've seen. And then when something changes, allegedly, and you go to a base and you have success, everybody's going to come out and say, Coach, why wouldn't you have gone to base sooner? But I think it goes back to what Jess said at the beginning with the offense over the defense. The San Francisco 49ers aren't exactly good offensively. They don't have very much talent offensively. And I would say they're schemed very well and coached very well. They just lack any discernible talent on that side of the ball outside of, their offensive line and Matt Breida, which is why they've been in a lot of football games. I mean, if you look at their scores, it's not like they're just getting pummeled, right? Like they hung with Green Bay on Monday Night Football. They played well against LA. Obviously, against Arizona, they probably win that first game if CJ Beathard isn't going all Jake Delhomme on them. So all of those things, and then in this game, it wasn't the 49ers offense that lost them a game. It was the fact that their defense is just kind of awful. And so when you look at it from that perspective, like, I think Shanahan's ability is fairly impressive to get anything out of this offense. And so the fact that the defense was good this week, I think I do think you, like we said, you still give the Cardinals credit. You haven't done it for most of the season, so this was a good effort. And then you look at it and go, let's see you do it next time. And then we look, and next time is the best offense in the NFL. So it's like, all right, well, let's not take this at face value either. Can we get a game against a solid team? Like we're going from the 49ers to the Chiefs to the Raiders. Like, can we get like just another average team to see where the Cardinals stack up, as opposed to going from bad to great to bad?
that would be so. But now moving forward, it'll be interesting to see. Do they do this more? I think we will see this a little bit more against the Chiefs, simply because they will run some things out of 21 personnel. And so Buchanan probably will get some playing time. It's just a matter of, what does a rotation look after that? And with that, we will move on to the final segment of the show. Coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We'll wrap up any thoughts that we have for the team moving forward and with the win. That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. And we're going to wrap up the show with some more reactions to what we saw in the win. What does it mean moving forward? Now, they've got 2 wins. The offense is looking a little bit better. The defense is looking a little bit better. How many winnable games do you think are actually on the schedule?
When you look at it coming back, I just don't see any way that they're going to beat the Chiefs in Kansas City. Even coming off the bye, it's the NFL. Anything can happen. The Bills beat the Vikings, so anything can happen. But you have a guy in Patrick Mahomes who's likely the leading candidate for the MVP. And you've got an offense in Arizona that hasn't shown that they're ready to compete in that sense yet. So I don't see that. Oakland's a bad team. Arizona, as a bad team, should be favored in that game. Hey, did you know that the Cardinals weren't favored this weekend? That's absurd to me. Because, San Francisco's awful. And it's on the road. And they were 1.5 point favorites.
Yeah, it's crazy. It really is crazy. But hey, at least the Cardinals won. Again. They won the game and they beat the spread one more time. So that's the 4th time. I think they're 4-3-1 against the spread this year.
Yeah, but you look at the Raiders.
They're in the playoff. They're in the spread playoff mix. If we're going to go with that.
Exactly. But then you look at the rest. They've got to go to Green Bay. They've got to go to Atlanta. They got to go to Seattle. They have LA coming to Arizona. So when you look at it, I think there's 2 games that I would say, hey, those are wins, and that's Oakland and that's Detroit at home, right around sometime in December. And then there's always a game in every season where you go, oh, they got no chance, and then they win. So I think this team wins 4 to 5 games. I think they go 2-6 or 3-5 on the back half. I was looking at the 2018 NFL draft, and I wrote about this for tomorrow. But if they finish 4-12, which is a bad season, there's no other way to sugarcoat it. But if they finish 4-12, that was the 4th pick in the draft last year. 5 wins puts you in that 5, 6, 7 range. So I think even if they get to 5 wins, I think you're still looking at a top 7 pick in the 2018 NFL draft or 2019 NFL draft. And, I think obviously stacking wins is good, but if you're going to finish, 8-8 or worse, I'd rather, finish where you can get a game-changing talent at one of the numerous positions of need that they have.
And yes, you look at the schedule moving forward for me, you say the Raiders game, that should be a win because the Raiders aren't really trying to win as an organization.
That's a great point.
They've gone out of their way to trade their best defensive player and probably their best offensive player. And they're sure they've got a plan in place,
and their other best offensive player, Marshawn Lynch, is done for the year with a groin injury. So it's not just the trades, they're legitimately going out of their way to tank.
Now the Lions, they just traded away Golden Tate. So they lose a talented player. And the Lions the Cardinals have the Lions number. They just beat them consistently. So, those are 2 of their 3 home games, 2 of their 3 remaining home games left on the schedule. So Cardinals fans, hey, you're probably going to see their other win. You're maybe going to see 2 of their other wins. And then it's just a matter of, look at the teams they're playing. So I mean, I mean, as you look at the Cardinals' defense, and you realize, oh my gosh, there's no way they can do any of this because look at the offenses that they have to play. They have to play the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes. They have to play the Rams one more time. They have to play the Seahawks, who offensively have been fine this year. You have to travel to Green Bay and Aaron Rodgers. You have to travel to Atlanta and play that Atlanta offense. And they're inconsistent, but they still can put up points. The only saving grace is that, well, two things. Now that we hit the second half of the season, this is when the Cardinals defense should gel, which means, hey, if this is a good defense, like in terms of if this is a good scheme with good talented players, we should see them perform well or better or be able to limit these high-powered offenses. And then the other side of the ball on offense, if they show any growth, a lot of the defenses that they play will be subpar at best. Kansas City's defense are saved by the fact that their offense is nearly unstoppable. Green Bay's defense, nothing to write home about. You look at the Rams, good defensively. Seattle's defense, also not all that great. Atlanta's defense, come on. So these are games that they can, if the offense gets competent and the defense is closer to what we expect, they won't be ugly games. They should be competitive games at least, and maybe they can sneak at least one, maybe two wins, and then make me look brilliant by saying they're going to go 6-10.
Yeah, and I think that's what your hope is at this point, is that they're competent, they're competitive, and they're putting up they're putting up competition and looking like an NFL team, and you're not going, oh crap, I have to go cover the Cardinals again. It's not the first three quarters, but instead it's the fourth quarter of that of the last game.
Yeah, and let's kind of look back at the game. Another really bright spot to me, in fact, a very promising thing that we saw on the Cardinals was they're on the defensive side of the ball is that, guess what? Marcus Golden looks like he's back. He had a Chandler Jones-like game against the 49ers, like the Chandler Jones had in San Francisco. He was all over the field, 7 tackles. He had 2 for a loss. He had a sack. He didn't force a fumble like Chandler Jones did, but it would appear that the pass rush is going to be fine. They picked up, I think it was 4 sacks against the 49ers. I believe they have 24 on the season, I believe, which puts them, top 10 and average of 3 a game. So to see Marcus Golden play well on that other side of the defensive line, Chandler Jones plays well. If you get that other edge setter and that pass rusher, that's going to do wonders for what they do defensively. Robert Nkemdiche got heavy playing time. Corey Peters was out, and that was even more impressive is the fact that they weren't horrible. They were fine against the run without their best run defender. And Robert Nkemdiche came back in, and with the exception of one play where he, got up, he reached and was out of his gap. There was a big play involved, and another, I think it was Dalen Buchanan. Basically, they gave up 107 yards. And 26 of those came on one carry by Alfred Morris, which was a mental error. They stayed out of they got out of the gap. They take that away, and then you're looking at, about an 85 yard performance by the 49ers, who were the second best rushing team in the league. And so the rush defense might be almost there.
Yeah, and that's the hope, is that they're really close, and they are able to take the next step over the next couple of weeks. That's why I said, though, is that's the problem, is you don't have any consistency, and not that you can control the schedule and stuff like that, but you have no consistency in the teams you play. So you're coming in and you're going, oh crap, like it's like you said, it's going to be nearly impossible to stop the Kansas City Chiefs. And so you look at that and you go, okay, well, you don't want to say chalk that up, but you're going, okay, we need the offense to step up that week. And then, like I said, you get the Raiders. So that's good for the defense. Like, it should allow you to rebound and kind of get back on track. And so those are the things that are going to be interesting to watch. Is like, can they this sounds really stupid to say, but like, do they hold the Chiefs under 30 points? Because if they do, you consider that a successful day at the office.
Right. I mean, that's a win, and maybe what you can hope for is, 2 turnovers, to kind of limit. That way, you take away 2 scoring drive opportunities. Mahomes has been pretty amazing. And I'm actually super excited to watch this game because Mahomes is incredibly exciting to watch, and to have Mahomes and Rosen on the field they're not going to be on the field at the same time, but a game in between 2 quarterbacks that are very promising is exciting.
It is, and that's what should be fun about it. You're going to walk in and you're going to hope that things go their way, and that they play at a high level, and they look competent, and that they're a team that you're excited to at least watch, even though you know that they're probably not going to compete, or not. I shouldn't say that they're not going to win very much. They're still going to compete.
And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. We'll be back in a week. The Cardinals don't have a week game, so at least they won't lose this week. Hopefully, hopefully no one is that guy and they stay out of trouble at the weekend, because the Cardinals did give them an extra day off. So they had a practice on Tuesday. They were going to practice Wednesday. They will not. They had practice canceled, and so they are off until next week. So hopefully nothing bad happens. And so when we come back next week, we will kind of do our mid-season review. It won't be talking about any particular game, and we'll kind of break down, is there any way in the world they can beat the Kansas City Chiefs? And so we'll talk about some fun scenarios. And with that, that's Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com. I'm Jess Root. This is the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Thank you for listening.